I'm Jack Osborne, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
We have an unidentified flying object.
Researcher on a mission with Dr. J and the Elias.
We have an unidentified flying object.
All right, this is totally impromptu. We have some awesome people on. First, of course, first and foremost, one of the coolest people I know who's done so much astounding work to wake the world up, and it's just so really down to earth, honestly. A true asset to humanity, the one and only David Sereda. David, how are you?
Good to be here tonight.
Yeah, totally impromptu. That's the cool part about it. And then, of course, live in London, where it happens to be 3 a.m. again, as usual, same time. Johnny?
Johnny's up late.
Yeah.
I'm always up late, guys. Things seem to happen, after dark, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's sad. I know. Poor guy's always awake till the sun comes up. And then, of course, locally and also in Pacific time zone, we have Lieutenant Robert Wiegand or Weigand?
Wiegand. Yeah, it's great to be here.
Okay, so I was right. Yeah. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being on standby until we were able to get this done. Now, the last one we're waiting for is Jim, but I figure we could start until Jim calls back, or I doubt he'll forget, especially now that I left him a message and told him that we're all talking. I'm sure he's going to want to talk, whether he can do a few minutes or he can do an hour, because he said he had an hour drive, so that's cool. But yeah, David, I don't even know where we should start, because let's talk about Pleidas.
Let's talk about Pleidas, because this is where this is all going to hook in, hopefully, because Jim Gelatoso and I years ago had an astounding conversation about the Meyer case, which is completely unknown to the entire Meyer phenomena, and that has to do with the photographs. But giving some background on Pleiades, we know that the Greeks the mythology of the Greeks was that they were known as the Seven Sisters. There is a mythology in the Native American tradition of actually the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. This is very symbolic, because in their religion, the Devil's Tower of Wyoming is a story of a maiden, a goddess, who was being chased by 7 bears, and they clawed the sides of the mountain as it rose up, and she was sent up into the Pleiades and was basically rescued there. So it's amazing that Spielberg picked that spot, Devil's Tower, because that's a Pleiadian mythology in Native American folklore. So he might have been saying something about where they were from, even though in the film he never goes into it. And then we have in the Rig Veda, which is probably one of the oldest pieces of literature, spiritual literature, surviving from the ancient world. Rig Veda is probably at least 10,000 years old. And then you see the story in the Rig Veda of a god named Kritikaya, which is a god from Pleiades. And Pleiades were known as Kritika to them. And there were hymns that were sent, to the Pleiades, and they describe actual planets in the Pleiades where these gods and goddesses lived. And that is quite impressive. And then you go to the Mayan civilization in Central America. In Tikal, you have the 7 pyramids that are, if you superimposed a map from above, these 7 pyramids are built in alignment with the ratio and layout of Pleiades. And a lot of the Mayan mythologies say that Pleiadians actually came here, and they're the ones who built these pyramids. And, that's what really gave me a lot of ideas. But for me, before I even knew about the Pleiades and the Meyer case in 1967, 68, growing up in Berkeley, California, where our family is a bunch of Canadians who, my dad is getting his PhD at Berkeley in psychology, and moved us all down there, my mom, my 4 brothers, and I. And coming home from school one day, I see this classic flying saucer with no markings, a very distinctive type of metal shimmering, and there's pandemonium on the streets. Everybody's going crazy. And I built, models when I was a kid, the Rebel models for fighter jets and hot rods. And I had seen the Goodyear blimp, and this was no blimp. I mean, a lot of people tell me it was the blimp. I mean, come on. This was a flying saucer, and people don't go crazy over the Goodyear blimp. And the Goodyear blimp is kind of floating around, and it does have a metallic sheen to the fabric sometimes. Some of them are white, and they have the letters, big letters, and they also have the flashing, signs that they used to put on the bottom of them. So this was a flying saucer, and after 20 minutes, it blinks out, goes into another dimension. You can see these shimmering waves, like dropping a pebble in the water around it as it disappears. And then in the following days, I meet them in my sleep. I'm only 7 years old in 1968. And they start showing me their star system, which they didn't call Pleiades. They just showed me what it looked like. They showed me how the craft worked. And, I was lost. These experiences with them contacting me behind sleep and teaching me about their technology, their star system. They're very tall, humanoid, mostly blonde, but they weren't all blonde. And it's hard for me to remember their faces really clearly from that far back. But I've replayed the memory over and over and over again about the physical sighting and the dreams so many times that it's kind of like a permanent memory in my consciousness. And so when my mom divorced a second time, which was David Cooper, a Texan science teacher at the high school level, who was my stepfather for about close to a decade. And, I was really sad when we left him, and it broke my heart to leave him, but I was going back to be with my real father. And when we moved to Canada, Vancouver, in 1973 or 4, I see on the news the Meyer case. And it's actually on the Canadian news. And I'm looking at the pictures, and I go, finally, that's what I saw.
It was the way you saw, you said classic flying saucer. And you saw the Billy Myers. It was identical in that sense?
It was identical to some of them. Not the more advanced beam ship with the big knobby thing on the top. It was more
like the Bob
Lazar one?
Yeah,
it was more like the Lazar ones, but these weren't grays. These were, or Zetas. These were Palladians. And it was very smooth. I've identified the metal. It's, I've done a lot of study of metallurgy and different types of metals and the hidden properties of materials, reading solid state books, that go way back. And I really believe it was most likely tungsten, which has phenomenal properties, phenomenal magnetic field properties. Tungsten's used in the coils in microwave ovens. It's in the magnetron. It was used in light bulbs, really high-end light bulbs. You'd have tungsten, which would give you a really bright filament of white. And so anyway, that's probably the color of the metal. But when the Meyer story broke on the news, I was so excited because it was the first time I could connect somewhere. My mom didn't know what I saw. I could relate to Star Trek, and I was a big Star Trek fan as a kid. And I would later meet Leonard Nimoy and William Shatner and all the guys on the set of Star Trek in L.A. But there was nothing to connect, and this experience was with me for, a long time, my whole childhood, until this Meyer story came forth. And, I connected to the Christian in Switzerland, and I was making my documentaries on UFOs, and he sent me super high-res scans of all the pictures. And I really analyzed them because I was a professional photographer for, 15 years, and I was a darkroom expert. I developed black and white photography, and I won a lot of awards for creative and artistic photography. And I won, when I was at the high school level, I won best photographer for 2 different schools that I went to. And I really knew film really well. And what I wanted to do is see if these saucers were implanted in there, and if there was any shift in the film grain. That would be the first analysis I did. And when I looked at the film grain, in reverse, you can invert it in Photoshop today. It really is clean. There's nothing there that suggests that if somebody cut this out and put it in the photo, you would see possibly 2 different size film grains, like the UFO being one film grain, because of how big you blow it up, and then you would see the original film grain. And there was nothing like that. And the second thing you look for in a photograph with a UFO that's distance with film, with grain, is that when you take, for example, if I took a picture of a Timex watch on my wrist a foot away from the camera, my details would be phenomenal, and my grain in my film would be really, really low density. And then what happens is, if you take a picture of something like, this is a great experiment to do with the Meyer case, is you take a boat that's 30 feet in diameter, out of the water, and you take a picture from the same distance that Meyer was taking pictures of these UFOs, because they're around 30 feet wide from what we know. And so you take a 27-foot sailboat or a 30-foot sailboat, take the picture from the same distance, and when you zoom in, you don't have fine details in your lines and your trim lines on the boat and your serial numbers and all that. And that's what happens with the Meyer UFO. The more I zoom in on them, the ones that are 100 yards from the camera, they are truly distant in the photograph, which means they're not a model like a Timex watch close to you and trying to create this optical illusion. Because if they were like a small model hanging on a string in front of the camera trying to create an illusion, they would have a lot of fine details in the grain.
There's a very famous Billy Meyer photograph which shows the path in the mountains with the logs, and there's a sort of entrance to the woods, right. And then there's this very famous single disc looking very much like the Bob Lazar Sportster craft that he describes, and it's just hovering there. And are we talking about that particular photo?
Yeah, it's funny because that's exactly the one I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
And then when you go to the wedding cake one, you go, this is a model. Like, look at the font. There's so much detail. This thing is really close to the camera. I mean, that's what my years of developing film and looking at film tells me. This thing isn't far away. This thing is a small, 12-inch or
yeah, there's a very famous shot where it looks like, they call it the cake.
Yeah.
Craft,
that's fake.
Because it's got lots of knobs and things, and some people...
that one, I always thought it was it looked like a Mexican hat, sort of.
Yeah,
no. Well, I don't know. I wouldn't say that shape, but that is a single shape on its own. There is a category number for that particular craft that you're talking about, Dr. J. But no, on this particular one, it's got lots of knobbly bits, and it looks like something that you could put together, and that's the problem with it. In a single image, if you didn't see it and never knew anything about it, you'd think a child had made it. But
exactly.
Unfortunately, it's very real, and that's the problem, is because there's certain photographs that show lights protruding out of it and illuminating off of it at certain points of the craft. And they sort of mystified me. But I think the shot, going back to what David was saying, was a very close-up shot of this particular cake-type craft. And it was very close to the camera. And people say, oh, well, it's a tiny craft that's put up against the lens. But no, this thing was there, and the car was behind it. And then there was other shots that I clearly have to put into this, which was I think they called them beam ships. And it was like a square light that came above the house and just lit up the whole place. And I don't think, just because of the pure brightness of it, they were able to catch a proper shot of it. But, they do have footage of these things. And so, very strange. But anyway, back to what you were saying, David.
David, real quick, can you tell for anybody who doesn't know exactly who Christian is in relation to Billy?
Well, Christian was the person, I guess he spoke English, and he's the one, when I needed the rights to use the Meyer photography for my films, that I was dealing with. So I've never physically met him, and I didn't Skype him, because we didn't have Skype, when I was making the Dan Aykroyd Unplugged on UFOs, and I used the photography again in a couple of other films. Well, what ends up happening is I get on the phone with Jim Delatoso, who's a special effects expert and actually trains people how to, generate special effects. And I'm on the phone with Jim, and Jim is telling me that I guess it was Lee and Britt Elders and Shirley MacLaine that I guess approached him because they got the rights to the Meyer story for the Western, world. And they sent him 2 sets of photos of UFOs, fake ones and real ones, and they wanted Jim to make the distinction and his analysis and tell them which are the real ones and which are the fake ones. And I said, oh my God, that explains everything, Jim. I said, oh my God, nobody knows this, that it was done intentionally. And somehow, because in Switzerland, in those days, the early days, no one was speaking English, they probably had no idea that nobody had made the distinction between the fake photos and the real ones, and that Jim Del Toso did the same analysis I did. You know, you're zooming in, you're looking for your fine details. If it's truly a distant craft from the camera, it will have a lack of fine details. If it's, you know, a fake and it's close to the camera, it will have too many fine details. And so Jim explained the whole thing to me. He came up with the same results that I did and said, well, that was intentionally done so we could demonstrate how you tell the difference between something that's fake and something real. So Meyer had these models of fake ones, and his wife saw him building the models, and, you know, that's part of her story of how she tried to expose the whole thing. And I don't think she really understood, or everybody really understood, that there were the real ones and the fake ones. And his story begins, I believe, from the book, and we can ask Bob Wigan this question. In 1972, and, you know, I saw my plating craft in 68, and Meyer's photographs, I believe, began with a Olympus 35mm camera in 1972-ish. And so that's the first question, I guess, Bob, you know, what do you know about that?
Bob.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Are you cutting out a little bit? Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. What was the question?
Well, the question is to you about, one, when did Meyer first start taking the photographs? I believe it was 1972. He allegedly had contacts with Pleiadians as a younger child before then, but that's the first question, is when did he start encountering them when they allowed him to photograph them?
And can you speak close to the phone, Bob, so we can actually capture your voice?
Sure.
There you go.
Okay. You know, I apologize for that, because I have two people coming to my room and talking to me, and
okay.
I'm trying to tell them to get out. So
gotcha. Go ahead.
Close the door. You're asking,
okay.
I'm going to restate the question. You're asking if about the camera?
I'm asking when he started, like, was it 1972 when the Pleiadian craft started appearing and he started photographing them?
Oh, it started in his writings. He said he started at 5 years old.
Yeah, he started.
The first time he saw them, but what about the first time he recorded them?
The photographs.
Oh, that would be in the first photos that I saw when I met him. He showed me photos from India.
India, yeah.
And it was like 1958 or something like that. 1957.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah, because that was confirmed by the UN lady, you know, that she was on a hamrash with him or something. She was on some creche out in India, and that they together had witnessed this UFO, and that he had footage of it. And then
I didn't know that.
And the footage is very similar to a KGB footage that's released a couple of years ago that shows a couple of droids or you know, greys on a beach. Yeah. And so what you see is a craft following, you know, aeroplane following this particular sort of bubble type rounded, a bit like the Diaz sort of craft, but instead of being sort of orangey golden, it was silver. And then they show you this same craft on the beach and two dead aliens next to it. And it's very fuzzy. This is KGB footage that's been released, and it shows the four greys in black walking through a corridor.
Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about, with the skinny Bob footage, they call it.
Yeah, but do you remember the footage that comes with it is almost, people forget about that bit, but it's very important, because that, I believe, is very similar to Billy Meyer's footage, which shows a very similar disc. And as I say, this was mentioned by an Asian lady that met Billy Meyer, who later became a UN representative. And so, you know, I believe her word is good. And she describes you know, knowing Billy from the younger days, I think when he still had an arm, you know?
Yeah. At the ashram in India, the story goes that Billy sees a public that I have, and you have to become a passive member. That's the only way you can become. That's the only way you can get this information. So this is the story. I'll just tell you the story because it's a lot of detail behind it. But basically, there's a lot of writings that you have to request, and they're not public, and it goes into detail. And the lady that was the
Bob, you still there? You're cutting out.
Yeah, he's in a really bad zone, it sounds.
Yeah.
Oh, that's too bad.
Cell phone, is he? Or
a lot of people don't even have landlines anymore. So.
I know, and that's a
true,
scary thing, because I don't know what I'm going to do for Art. All right, let's call him back.
It's a shame he can't get on Skype. You know, this has been a wonderful tool.
Yeah. Let me ask him if he's got another option. He said earlier he could be by a landline, but I don't know if that...
But I'll tell you what made it real for me with Billy Meyer was when I heard that, what's-his-name got shot at, you know. The old guy was a UFO reporter, and he went up there with another guy.
To Switzerland?
Yeah.
Bob, it's okay.
House, yeah.
Bob, do you have a landline where you're at?
let me, hold on a second.
Okay. Are you with Michael Horn?
No. Okay, no. Most of us that live up here, we don't have landlines. We all have cell phones.
Yeah, we were just talking about that.
Okay, let me walk over here to this area that I know it's good. All right.
You're not breaking up as bad where you are now.
You're fine.
Okay, good. All right. So
you can just get closer to your phone like you were a couple minutes ago.
You know, when he was 5 years old, I don't know what year that was. I do know that it was in the 40s, and he was met by Safath, who was very old and eventually died. And Safath spent probably 12 years with him, something like that. Some of the timelines I don't have in memory. I'm just giving you estimates. When he went to India, he was introduced to the man who ran the ashram.
Which ashram? What is the ashram?
Okay, the lady that was in the UN, her father ran the ashram, and she was a little girl, and Billy was there with a monkey, and he wore...
He was asking, what's the ashram? What is, because I don't even know what that is.
The ashram? Monastery.
Yeah, I know, but which one? Like, was there a guru? Was there...
The guy that he was under instruction with.
Yeah,
he was learning from this guy.
Oh, he was learning, from a yogi, or...
Yeah, it was like a yogi. He was learning I think he was learning about Buddhism.
Oh, wow. Okay, that gives us some idea, yeah.
No, he joined, he went through the Buddhism training, through the Muslim training. He even joined their faith to get a great understanding of what they were really about, and other religions as well. And he was on a journey, and I'll just give you a quick overview, because there's a lot of pieces that will start coming in, fitting together. At 5, he saw a ship fly overhead, and he told his dad, "Hey, Dad, what is that?" And his dad goes, "Oh, that's a Foo. That's from Hitler. That's one of his secret airplanes." Because they were flying over the flying discs. The Foo Fighters were flying in some areas, and people had seen them. Well, eventually it lands, and Safath comes out and talks to him, and they go up about 60,000 feet, and he has a thing put on his head, and it reminds him of who he is and of his past and why he's here. And he has this feeling that he really wants to help humanity. That's basically what he says. And then he goes under instruction with Safath, and a lot of times he doesn't even go to school. He just goes out in the woods, and he thinks and meditates. And so anytime any trouble came up in the town or in the village he lived in, he was the guy that got fingered for it. So they would throw him in front of a court, and he would not talk. And so they finally said, there's something wrong with him. He started, when he was in jail being held for a hearing as a kid, he was telling about the spacecraft and the visitor, and they thought he was crazy, put him into an asylum, a mental hospital, and he was sentenced for 2 years, and he didn't like that, and he's just a kid. So what he does, he's a teenager now, he fashions out of a piece of wood a key, and he unlocks the window frame, and he jumps out 2 stories on a rainy night and practically breaks his ankle and takes off and gets into the river, freezing cold in the middle of winter, and he swims, gets away, and he joins the French Foreign Legion, and he ends up, he never says where it is, but it sounded like it was in Angola, and he ends up as a soldier in the French Foreign Legion. And after a while, he realizes this isn't really the way he wants to spend his life, because he's with all these guys that they like killing. And so he says, I'm going to get out of here. I'm walking out. And the people that knew about it told him, if you leave and survive, which you probably won't, you will be considered a hero. And so he gets prepared to leave. And before he goes, his boss comes up to him and tells him, hey, there are the 7 hells you're going to have to experience if you think you're going to walk out of that place. And so he started walking, and he 7 hells. He experienced them all, probably like 10. He nearly died several times out. He went back to the asylum and turned himself in and finished his time. And he said, this isn't the right way to live. So then he got out, and then he went into the Middle East, and the ashram, part of his journey, girl in the UN was a little girl, and at this point, Safath had died, and now he was handed over to a lady named Asket. And he says Asket came from the Dal universe. We are called the Dern, I think, the Dern universe, and we're the Dal. I get them mixed up. But it's a sister, it's the mirror image, the opposite. Every universe that's created has an opposite balance. It's done for balance. And so in this other universe, this lady Asket comes over for about a dozen years and starts training him. And this woman is super advanced, highly spiritual. We would call her like an angel. She introduced him to the future and the past. And most of those notes were destroyed, but he does talk about them in these spiritual teachings. And she tells him his life's going to be really tough, gives him a future look at his wife, his lost arm, on and on and on. He knows when he's going to die. He knows his whole life history and what he has to do. And they wanted him to write 8 books, and he's written over 50 so far. So he overdid what he needed to. Now, in the ashram in the 50s, when he was there, he has photographs of him standing there with his monkey and no shirt and a hat. And there's discs. They look like they're on fire above his head. And then there's one photo where it's a big cross, a hologram cross in the sky. I think it must have been 300 feet tall. Wow. And that was done by Asket. And then there are other photos as he gets married that come up along the way, but they're not like what you were given, David. There were like just family photos with discs up in the sky, high in the sky. Hold on one second. I'm going to plug this phone in.
No problem. Question for David, actually, this comment. First time I ever heard about multiple universes, the multiverse, the term multiverse, was actually in your film. Mm-hmm. Your first one.
Yeah.
The NASA one.
Have you actually been to Schmidt-Rutte yourself, David?
No, I've never traveled there, no. I've never met Meyer in person.
Okay.
And it's interesting what he's saying right now, what Bob is saying, because just the other night I was with a Pleiadian woman in my dream, and she was saying something similar to me, is that when they dream, there's actually an opposite magnetic field. It's kind of hard to describe it. We're trapped in an unconscious dreaming state, and they dream in it's literally, the only way to describe it is like it's an active parallel universe state, and they're much more aware. And of course, if you learn in India, the meditation techniques like that I've learned, and you can learn how to be a conscious dreamer. And that's
lucid dreaming, right?
Yeah, because everybody dreams. If you live in the Pleiades, you dream, and if you live here, you dream. But there's something about Earth and these brains that we have. We are so cut off in our naturally born state. And it's not only the natural born state, it's putting fluoride in the toothpaste and destroying the pineal gland.
Just going to say it's on purpose.
It's on purpose to keep you locked up. And then when the pineal gets awakened, which started happening to me as a young kid, you start to see. And then you go, wow. And that's why, like, they put Meyer, I guess, in a mental hospital. I don't know how long he actually stayed there. So Meyer I know he started having experiences as a little kid, but the photographs that we see from Switzerland, I believe, started in 1972.
That's correct. The younger photographs, they're just not out for distribution. I may have some on my hard drive, but they're just not out for distribution. One center, and I met Billy, Christian, sat down and he pulled all those old photographs out and showed them to me.
Right. So the book UFO Contact from the Pleiades that I guess Lee and Britt Elders were involved in that, and Shirley MacLaine. That is the photographs I'm talking about. So that begins in 1972, and I guess at that point he gets a decent camera, and that's why the photographs are so good.
Look, the speculation was that how could Billy Meyer set these cameras up with just one arm, you know?
And then hoax it too.
Yeah, but the thing I'd like to mention, because if we go back to the early days of the photographs being released and people taking an interest internationally for him, there was Wendell that went out there. And
Wendell Stevens, you mean?
Yeah, and he got shot at. So there must have been something to it to get shot at in the first place, And I mean, physically, there was a bullet hole that just missed him while he was sitting outside Billy Meyer's house. And he swears that, he was getting close to the truth, not from Billy Meyer's point of view of being harmed, but that, it was getting bigger and international, and that they wanted to keep it down. And still to this day, a lot of people don't know about Billy Meyer, and it is one of the most amazing cases,
Well, there's an effort to keep all the information quiet. Jan of MUFON, the director.
Yeah, Jan Harzan. Yeah.
Okay, I have recorded it, and he read the Meyer material. This is him talking. I was there, and the Meyer material came to him when he was a young kid, and he believes it. And Michael Horn wanted to have a Billy Meyer page on the MUFON website, and he goes, let me talk to the board. So he comes back and he says, all 10 of them say it's all false. And so Michael Horn just kind of talked him into putting it up there. Because of his own personal experience, he put up a page on Billy Meyer on the MUFON website. Now, Jan said, quote, we are not here to hurt anybody's book sales. Whether their story is real or false, it's not for us to say. We're not here to hurt their book sales. That's what he said. And so he was talking about some person back east that was sending soil samples over to them, saying that it was a landing craft and it had radiation in it, and for them to sample it, and then there was nothing in it. It was just dirt. And
let me ask you a question. I don't want to go out of order, David. You could bring me back to Earth or to the time frame. But I remember reading Wendell Stevens went to visit him, and Billy talked about an incident where he was taken to inside pyramids in Egypt.
Yes.
And given some documents, and when Wendell Stevens was going through them, he cracked the code or deciphered it where it read Billy, Billi, but not with the Y. Do you know what I'm talking about, that incident?
Yeah,
you guys?
I do. Yeah, what it was is it's kind of the stories, the text that you're talking about in the pyramid. I think they're different events. I can tell you about both of them real quick, but the text talked about a future man, and it was an old document written by an ancient prophet. I think it was Enoch, that said there would be a prophet of this time. His name he would be called Billy. And that's what the text said. I think
that's what it was.
Enoch. Yeah.
Okay.
And as far as the pyramid goes, Asket, when he was with Asket, it's kind of an incredible story. He put on a suit with her, and he put on a translator device with her, and the suit made him invisible, and he could walk through walls. And she took him down to 1,000 feet depth of the Great Pyramid, and there was a big ship about 1,000 feet across, and on the table was against the wall, leaning, was a cross, very old, a spear. On the table was a crown of thorns and several emeralds.
Whoa.
And it freaked him out, and he really became like emotionally unstable for a moment. And he goes, "What is that?" And she goes, "Oh, those are actual artifacts from the time of Christ. They are actually 2,000 years old, and they've been sitting there the whole time. These people, the Baphath, are willing to orchestrate the returning of Jesus Christ on this planet in order for them to maintain power over all the people. And that's what they're there for, just in case they need it."
For who to orchestrate it? For the governments or the ET?
The Baphath. The Baphath, I think the Baphath are our owners. We are owned. I've seen this personally, we are owned by an alien race that keeps us in the dark and does not allow us to progress. And the purpose of the Meyer material was that the Pleiadians received the go-ahead from the Grand Council in the Andromeda Galaxy to bring forth the spiritual teachings again on this planet to help us through our own force of might of our own thoughts and our free will to break our chains from the owners who own us. And they are alien, and they control about every aspect of our life. And we live within a mental matrix of, it's like if you really sit and contemplate your life, you wonder why it seems like the light bulb is really dim.
I think of George Carlin when you say it like that, the way he puts it out, you know, they own you.
The owners, he never names them, but I saw them. They're not from here. They're our owners. Getting into the history of what Meyer teaches, there's a lot of other information, and one of the stories goes like this. And the Pleiadians' history goes back 22 million years. 50,000 years ago, they broke off from the main population and went on their own. They were tired of fighting in wars. It was 22 million years of wars where they would build up this excellent technology and then they'd blow themselves up and start over again and again. And the Pleiadians became tired of it and they didn't want to do it anymore. And so they left. And they've been peaceful for the last 50,000 years. They've been making alliances with other peaceful planets throughout the universe and also in the other universe, the Dern universe. And so it goes back, the Lyrians and the Lyran system were very advanced, and they had bred out genetically their war fighting in order for them to progress spiritually. Because it is said that as we become more spiritual over a 40, 50 million year period, that's actual Earth years lived, not, complete. In the fine matter world and in the matter world, it's the matter. This is the matter world. You call it in religion the spirit world and the temporal world. They call it the matter world, the fine matter world. So through these progressions and evolutions, we eventually merge back with creation itself as spirit, and we don't have to incarnate in the body anymore. So it's reincarnation we talk about too. The Illyrians were being attacked by a very vicious and advanced race, and they were enslaved, and they had to get out of it. And what they did is they genetically created a new race of humans that were extremely aggressive, could fight, only lived 100 years so that they wouldn't populate too fast. And the war lasted 500 years, and the Illyrians won, and then they had a grand council, and several of the people in the council said, let these humans live on and evolve like us. And there was another part of the council that said, no, we created them, we own them, we're destroying them, because if they become too populous, they'll destroy us. And that's what started happening. So the benefactors rounded up, I don't know how many people, and took off from the Lyrian system and ended up in the Vega and the Syrian system, and eventually over here to not Earth exactly, but to Mars and Malona. Malona is the asteroid belt past Mars. The people there blew it up. And Mars had people on it, but they decimated the planet, blew out the atmosphere. And so whatever survivors there were came here to this planet. And there are also, this planet was in the beginning a prison planet, and then it became, about 320,000 years ago, it became a habitable planet. And in the writings of Billy that talks about races coming here from other places and living amongst the people and then taking off, and happening time and again, and they never really stay. But the overriding owners were always here, and they feel they own us. They own our genome. They feel they own it, and they own it because they created us genetically. They were at first our benefactors, and then they became our owners. So they became corrupted. What's happening with them is they're all dying off. They're almost all dead now. And they were told that if they would turn their ways around, that their race would continue on, but because they have prevented us from progressing spiritually, that they have gone into kind of like a retrograde physically. They're not incarnating any, but they're not surviving. So when I was working for President Bush Sr. and Senator John McCain, I saw these they're not creatures, they're not reptilians, they're human beings, extremely spiritual, extremely, how would I say, powerful, highly intelligent. I mean, it's like us walking around like cows. These people are more than advanced. I don't have any words to describe it, but they're very dark. They're very ill. And what they do is they take the negativity that we produce and they use it. And they use it as weaponized. They weaponize it. And it gets really esoteric after this. Are you guys still there?
Yeah.
Sure.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. It gets really kind of esoteric after this. What I saw is, I call it the table of 450. These owners oversee a president who sits at a table with about 450 leaders of the world, the Bushes, Rockefellers, and Putin, all kinds of leaders. I mean, how would I say, there are no countries on this table. And when I asked, I go, where does the head of the table get his directives? And then I was told it comes from the owners. And I go, well, who are the owners? And the owners are the alien race that own you. They brought you here. And I never got to the point, like I was so shocked, I never got to the point, like, why are they doing this? All I was able to see is that they have promised these people at the table ultimate power. And in that ultimate power, they have taught the religions they brought us the religion, the first religion, and then other religions broke off of that. And then they taught the money system, and they taught the occult, which, that's just hidden things, but it's like witchcraft. And they basically layered and conflicted and dissected and racialized us to a level that is almost infinite. And we are so lost in the matrix of this nonsense that we can't see. We can't see. We can't see them. We can't see what's going on. We can't even. The harder we try, the more it seems like we get wrapped in this lockdown, this mental and spiritual lockdown. So the Meyer material was brought by the Pleiadians to help us break free from this. Now, in my past, I still hold these titles: a high priest in the Mormon Church, a high priest in Palo Mayombe, which is the dark side of Santeria. Of course, the SEAL teams. I was a mercenary before the word contractor came out.
Really?
Yes, and the guy that started...
Can you mention the company you worked for?
I was by myself. Back then, mercenaries were gunslingshots.
We're solo. Gotcha.
If you had the talent, you were picked up and put on a team, and I was put on a team. And in that team, this one guy, I don't really name names because I don't know if they want me telling anything, because I don't want...
Understandable.
Because the CIA might come down on them. Okay. In my group was a gentleman I became really good friends with, and it's kind of funny. I mean, he tested the crap out of me, like, this is what Spec Ops guys will do. This is what we do. We're crazy. Let's go out and run. So we sprint for 2 miles. All right, who won? We look at each other, not really breathing hard. Okay, let's go swim 2 miles. Swim as hard as we can. Okay, we're like halfway across the bay in the Philippines. All right, let's go back. Let's see, what else can we do? We started making and then finally he turned to me and goes, okay, I know you're for real. I'm going to tell you some stuff. Because here's the deal. The guy was SAS. He was doing undercover work in Ireland against the Irish Republican Army when it was the real deal, when they were really fighting. And he was undercover 2.5 years, came back, his wife got pissed, blew his cover. He got a citizenship in America, a new identity, came here, worked for the CIA. went to Kenya, Nigeria, and all those countries around there, and working under the CIA was killing villages, flying over and machine gunning people, and the United Nations Humvees would pick up the dead bodies and get rid of the evidence. And it was all orchestrated by the corporations.
David or Bob, maybe either of you could answer this for me. Do you think that it's the governments, obviously the big corporations and all those are keeping us dumbed down from knowing our true potential and everything else, our true origins, everything under the sun. But do you think it's, as you just said, Bob, do you think it's a race, someone else that's really being the true puppet master, and the highest levels of this conspiracy on Earth are really puppets? Or, I mean, what is David, your take, and Bob take? Both of you guys, I'd love to hear both answers on that.
Well, you have to put the onus on the individual. See, we want, and it's our own fault, but we want somebody else to do our spirituality for us because we're lazy creatures. And that's why the way the Romans repackaged Christianity, like when Jesus says in the Gospel of Philip that if you don't attain the resurrection when you live, when you die, you'll get nothing. Well, that statement alone is an iconoclasm against the idea that you just have to go get baptized, live a crazy life, and you're going to heaven. And the heavens clearly demonstrate themselves as above us in being higher in vibration, higher in purity and spiritual integrity and luminosity and consciousness. So what that means is when you look deeper into Mr. Christianity, you find, like as I found, that Jesus taught in the Gospel of the Egyptians these 7 sacred tones of this perfect ancient music scale that you would intone to activate and turn on the chrisms or the light body, and that's how you start to get free. And I did math on the Great Pyramid and found the scale. You can see my video on Vimeo. If you just look for the Law Scale on Vimeo, you can see where I play all the 12 tones of our base music scale, A, B, C, D, F, G, and then you can shift octaves if you want, but you find that they all distort. There's distortion in between them when you stack them. You turn A, B, C. See, when you turn on each tone in a tone generator, you don't turn it off. You stack them, and you look for the difference of the energy between the notes, and they really wobble. And then there was this idea that the solfeggio scale was the perfect scale, and when you stack the solfeggio 9 tones, they distort also, but they're much better. The pyramid scale that I found in the math is utterly flawless. The tones are so beautiful and so perfect. There's no distortion between them, and clearly that is the scale that Jesus taught, and it's also the scale probably that Pythagoras taught, even though we're taught to believe that Pythagoras didn't teach this scale. You can clearly see in the Greek math that the 5.1 harmonics are clearly mentioned in the Greek, because in Greek, the lyre, it's funny because you're talking about the Lyrans and the Lyran constellation as being a branch off of the Pleiadians, and the god Apollo creates the lyre with his brother Hermes. These are very symbolic names and meanings, and that he probably got these tones from, and the music scale from there, because the meaning of Kithara, which is the earliest lyre in Greek, the Greeks have a number. They have a number for every word, every letter in the Greek alphabet. And the number of Kithara, which is Sitara, which became Gitara, is 5-1. So 5.1 is C, and that is not where we are at today. We're slightly over from that. And I found all the other numbers in the scale. I found there are 360 tones in this scale. And these tones, which is, part of my online meditation course, is how you activate your light body truly. Now, if you're toning and doing music to the wrong scale, it's going to whack you out. It's not going to let your pineal shine and open up. And it's also interesting, and I'd like to hear what Bob knows about this, is when the Pleiadian craft would appear, what were the sound vibrations? I mean, a lot of people describe a vibrational energy when UFOs appear. And does Meyer talk about this at all?
Yeah, he does.
Bob?
In these books that are not published, it goes into great detail in the craft, how they operate, how they're made, how they're constructed, the engines that they have. They're not engines, they're propulsion systems, the power plants, that these craft actually have more than one propulsion system in them. One is for terrestrial travel, and the other is for hyperspace. And the beam ship term came from shooting a laser beam, finding the target at the other end, accelerating to the speed of light, and then releasing all the energy built up at that speed and creating a black hole that they basically punched through and came out the other side to the destination that they wanted to go.
Yeah, that's right. Because Bob, sorry to interrupt you, but I remember Bob Lazar talking exactly on those lines back in in the early '88, and he was talking about we would put the waveguide rod of these UFOs. They would point out and literally turn into antimatter, and you would fall into it. And the way he explained it was, if you imagine the whole universe like a sheet of elastic, and you put an apple there on the Earth, and then along this sheet of elastic you put an orange, and you said that was 50,000 miles, you could pull it. And he said they'd put this waveguide rod on, and it would switch on the generator.
Wormholes.
And literally, it was like shining a torch. You'd snap it onto the point where you wanted, and he explained it that if you pulled the elastic of the thing, you're pulling the actual element of where you want to be towards it.
Wormholes. Einstein, Rosenberg.
Well, listen,
I always think
you
of
guys,
These are ways that we're trying to explain, but the writings tell a little different.
we see this new case of the Texas UFO cube.
Yes.
And you see the black hole above the cube.
Yeah, what they're doing is they're going to no time, no space. That means no time, no space. No time and space are connected. You can't separate them. So if you get no.
Let me ask you this real quick, guys. The Seam Harriman's work, the physicist in Thrive. When I interviewed him, basically he was talking about the implications of the theories that he's been working on are essentially what we're talking about.
Tex donuts.
Yeah, what would be science fiction to us in the morning, the moment we're able to control gravity, everything's thrown out the window and it becomes fact. A force field, wormholes, even time travel, which I never really thought was possible, but according to Einstein, really, if we can control gravity, we can, right?
Yeah, we can, and that they explain in these teachings. Billy explains how to do it. In fact, if a person is researching how to do this and is funded tremendously, and you read these teachings, it'll pull the pin on what direction to go. He's talking about these things. He's being told, Billy is being told, don't go any further. Don't say any more. You've already said enough. If you say any more, you'll give up the secrets. There's no need to do that. There are 7 layers to an atom. You people know 4. There are 7 elements of nature, and we know 4 or 5. And he's told not to release that information because when we're too young to have it right now. We blow ourselves up. The sounds of the ships when they show up is nothing because they shield their sounds. They have shields that can handle a nuclear explosion, a detonation right on top of them. They can protect themselves from it. Somehow the ship would absorb that energy. They have shields that keep back the mass that's built up as they increase their speed. When they get up near the speed of light, their mass is like millions and billions of times more than stationary, and they have shields to protect themselves from it. And what they do is they direct the weight of their mass in forward, and this is the old technology. They have new technology now. It'll blow your mind. I'll tell you in a second. And that's what creates what we call a wormhole, or that pulling from some distant place towards us. That's not how it works.
Is it like a mobile gateway?
No, it's not. It works like
Stargate was the word.
No. It's that beam technology is different. There are many forms in the teachings. It says there are many forms of travel to travel the universe. This is just one of them. And they have to be 98 million miles away from any object, because when they go into fine matter, or the spirit world, anything around them within 98 million miles, they'll pull in with them.
Hold on. Can I interrupt? We got Lou listening on. Lou, can you mute, please? Because we're getting off feedback.
Okay.
No, Lou, there's somebody's just listening on. It's a loyal listener, my research consultant for us. Lou, can you please mute? Lou. There. Okay, go on.
Okay. So on the beam ship, the new ships don't travel like this, but the beam ship, the ships are funny. There's a lot of information on the ships. The beam ship travels on a beam of light, but it has to be 98 million miles away from anything, because when it creates its no time, no space, it'll pull whatever is around it with it, like a planet. And so it has to be clear out in space before it can transition into hyperspace.
Do you think that that's what happened in Tunguska?
In what?
In Tunguska, in Russia,
Yeah,
in the
Russia.
1900s, there was a major event where it just flattened trees for about 150 miles. And I heard it was a UFO that had caused that.
Yeah, there's a great detail he writes about that. He's actually in a conversation, and he's talking with one of the Pleiadians, and they're telling him what happened. What it was is it was a ship with a crew on board. They were not supposed to come here. Backing up before this event, a ship came here from another planet, and it picked up the Bibles, the Korans, and all that stuff, and took them back home and found it all very interesting. And all of a sudden, religion started flowing across that planet, and within a couple of 2 or 3 years, they were ready to blow themselves up, because they were all fighting over the different philosophies of these different books, and even the books themselves and what they meant. And so what happened is intervention came in, and the Pleiadians stepped in, and they said, hey, they basically burned all the books and told them, been quarantined Earth for like 100 years. No one can come here. And they had to work with that planet to get them balanced out again. Then, within that 100-year period, this scout ship comes in here, and it has quite a few people on it. I forgot the number. And they had problems with their propulsion plant, and they could not get outside of our atmosphere. So they worked on it to try and fix it. It was impossible. They sent out a distress signal asking for help because the Earth was quarantined. They were told, raise your ship up as high as you can, drop it down, and detonate it. And many of the people on board the ship were also ill. They had gotten ill from some virus or bacteria here on the planet. So they blew themselves up. They raised themselves as high as they could. They dropped themselves free fall, and when they got within a certain distance from ground, it wasn't very high, they detonated themselves, and that's what knocked all those trees down.
Wow.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Did they deaden themselves on purpose, you're saying?
They were ordered to.
For what purpose?
Because the Earth was quarantined at that time, and no one was allowed to come in, and they came in, breaking the quarantine, and they were not allowed to be helped. And they were not allowed to land and let the technology...
See, it's interesting. There's something about the human brain. It's if you read Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, which is in Gurdjieff's material, he talks about...
Beelzebub?
Beelzebub, yeah. It's Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson talks about the different types of extraterrestrials and how humans have this two-dimensional brain, and then you get into 4- and 8-dimensional brains. And see, the thing about a two-dimensional brain is it wants to polarize everything. As, like, what Jesus told me in person when I first met him, shining like thousands of suns in Topanga, California in 1994, October.
Amen.
He said that the knowledge of good and evil itself is the problem. You see, he says, if thine eye be single, your whole body shall be filled with light. But when you go into polarity, you want to polarize everything as good and evil. And when you compare your good and evil to your neighbors, they're different. So you're going to fight. And you're going to think your religion's better, or the way you interpreted the book is better than the other guy. So everybody's always fighting, thinking that he's better than the other one. And that's why, what Bob is saying, when you show, if I were to deliver the books of the Buddha and the books of Christianity and Hinduism and Islam to another planet, they would all start fighting, because that's how a polarized two-dimensional brain works, is it wants everything to be identifiably good and evil. But there is no good and evil in actuality. In the actual pure state of consciousness, it's all one. And I don't just mean that in a simple way. When you go into a state of oneness, it is so astounding to look at ordinary objects. Everything is so beautiful, even a stone wall. The God energy is inside of everything. And I go into this state regularly. And I can tell you that where the mind wastes all of its energy is this constant conflict over good and evil, trying to categorize things as right or wrong, or should I do this or should I do that. It's wasting all of its consciousness and its energy in the state of duality. So when you read the Gospel of Thomas, the whole book is about singularity and duality. You know, Jesus says if you make the two into one and you tell a mountain to move, it will move. And what's interesting, when you see the work of William Tiller at Stanford University, he is a material scientist or solid-state physicist. He's studying the hidden properties of materials. And one of the most profound consciousness researchers on the planet, hands down, is William Tiller. And what he found was that consciousness, pure consciousness, not just a thought, is so powerful that when it's coherent, it is more powerful than gamma rays. And the reason they know this is because if you take a radio signal, for example, on your cell phone in the microwaves, and you go into a concrete basement, like a car parking garage, you'll lose your signal. And what they did is Tiller did these experiments where they took water samples 6,000 miles away from the researchers, and they trapped a human positive thought telling the water 6,000 miles away to change in pH, its pH balance, to go up or to go down. And they didn't use a meditator to hold his mind in that state. They trapped his positive thought in fruit fly larvae. It's a device called an IIED that Tiller invented. And every time the water would go up in pH or go down, a full pH unit, which is impossible against random chance. And so he said that means that consciousness is penetrating all the mountains, all the barriers. It's going through everything, and even X-rays can't do that. So therefore, when you understand the conversion of electromagnetic energy back into physical energy, so when you have, for example, a red photon, a red particle of light hits a conductor, like a piece of steel, the red conductor the electrons will get excited to a certain level of energy, physical energy. A blue photon, because it's higher in frequency than red, will exhibit a greater charge on the conductive plate. And Tiller was doing experiments with this, with consciousness researchers and plates of copper. So what he found was that, of course, microwaves are more penetrating than radio waves. They're at the bottom of the spectrum. So then when you get past microwaves, you eventually get to the color infrared, and then you get to red, then you get to blue, indigo, violet, and then you get to ultraviolet. And then ultraviolet light still doesn't penetrate barriers very well, but X-rays are quite penetrating, and gamma rays are the most penetrating. Gamma rays are so powerful that a tiny 10-second burst of gamma rays from a distant supernova has the potential, if it were to arrive here, destroying this whole place. So consciousness operates, according to Tiller, at higher frequencies than gamma rays, which means it's way more powerful than gamma rays. And the reason they know it is it's more penetrating, right? The gamma rays can be stopped with enough rock and materials, like a mountain will stop, most of your gamma rays. But consciousness goes right through everything, which means it's the highest frequency, which means it's the most powerful. But I'm going back to this knowledge of good and evil trap. See, God in the Old Testament warns Adam and Eve, never take in the knowledge of good and evil, because if you do, you're going to die. And what happens is when consciousness tells everything around it, it's all the atoms in your body and everything, to go into duality, what does it do? It goes in, it's consuming all the energy because they're rubbing against each other. And what's amazing about this is when you look at the quantum, world, you go to the atom and smaller in these big bubble chamber experiments and these large hadron collider experiments, every particle is in duality. You get a tau, an anti-tau, a muon, an anti-muon, a neutrino, an anti-neutrino. Everything is in duality. And that is why it travels so slow, the speed of light.
We lost Bob. Let me bring him back real quick.
Mm-hmm. So does that mean like when...
A call has been forwarded to an automatic voice message.
Sorry about that.
When we think of, what do they call it, quantum mechanics and physics, that everything is multiple choice, duality, until a choice is made or the image is looked upon, and then it becomes the singularity.
Well, this is a great question. This is a really important question.
Yeah. Here, let me try him one more time real quick, and then otherwise I'll just wait for him.
Your call has been forwarded to...
I hope his phone didn't die while we were talking.
Well, he was mentioning that he had to plug it in, and then he went outside, so...
Gotcha.
See, what's happening with your question is, does the observer affect the observed? And if the observer's in duality, then everything the observer's observing is in duality. And if it's in duality, it's wasting all of its energy. See, it turns out why every particle that you look at is in duality is because the observer's in duality. Jesus said, if an eye be single, your whole body shall be filled with light. Now, the amazing thing about light is it appears that light is not duality. Light spins positive. It has a positive charge, positive electromagnetic charge, where is everything, electrons, anti-electrons, the quark, up quarks and down quarks, so you have your atom is basically, the nucleus of the atom is the neutron and the proton, and the neutrons and the protons are where all of this heavy mass of the atom is. The neutron is heavier than the proton, which means there's more energy, there's more mass energy, physical energy. And when you look at an electron, which is really the lightest particle pretty much the lightest particle we've ever discovered next to neutrinos, it is a positive and negative electron. And then so you go to when you go to your neutron, the neutral charge on the atom, you have quarks there and you have quarks in the proton. But then when you go further, you get taus, muons, and you get all kinds of Z particles, W particles. You get all these subatomic particles, and they're all in duality. So the question is consciousness causing it to be in that state? And because the consciousness of the human brain is stuck in polarity matrices, and it wants everything to be identified as either positive or negative, is that preventing it from seeing the real universe? And that question really perplexed me for years when, after my blinding appearance of Christ, I could suddenly see the dead, I could see angels, I could see spirits, I could see star beings with my eyes open, not getting a picture in my head, but seeing them in the same 3D space that I see other people in. And I realized, why am I seeing this? And I see it. I was seeing it for years. 14 years I saw hundreds of spirit beings and ghosts and deceased family members. And this is where it gets interesting, is that when consciousness shifts through the meditation, and you tonally... See, meditation is divided into three major categories. You have basically energy or prana, or what you call in India, you call prana, which is breath. Yes. You have asana yoga, which is the movement of the body with breath to get the energy flowing. In China, what you call qi. And kung fu, right, it's really...
The chanting in the Om system is...
and then you get into sound, and sound is mantra. So you go asana, mantra, and the sounds have to be, like in Native Indian traditions, Native American and First Nations in Canada traditions, you couldn't just read a book and start toning a chant. You had to learn it from an oral master, so your pitch was perfect. And if your pitch wasn't perfect, you weren't going to open the door to the spirit world until you got it right, until your body knew how to make that sound. Well, mantra, if you look at cymatics, sound sets up geometry. So geometry is the shape of frequencies and vibration that it generates. And that is known as yantra in the yoga system in India. So yantra is the geometry. And so when you look at the pyramids and all the sacred sites and temples, they're the freeze form of the yantra, the vibrational imprint of proper intoned frequencies, which is why when you go into a building that's built in resonant structures and you sing in there, it's unbelievable. Like it starts activating you. So
do you know, David, the building in New York, which is it's one of the only churches in Manhattan, and maybe something to do with the Rockefellers, I'm not sure, but inside this church, in the ceiling and on the floor is geometry and sacred knowledge that's implanted in the building that gives tremendous information, and I just wondered if you were conscious of that.
No, I've really studied a lot of, the ancient sites of England and done a lot of math, and very new math on Stonehenge. And
yeah, that's actually one thing that really, I have so much appreciation for you, because I'm a big math guy, that you've actually applied math, because mathematics is the only universal language that we have. And the fact that you've been analyzing things with math, and I think that just takes it to one step above what other people do. So I just got to throw that out there.
What I'm trying to do, because I'm realizing that frequency is everything, and tone is everything. When it comes to accelerating consciousness,
you mentioned it in a frozen state, and I think of Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, and then it reminded me of the church in Manhattan that has this sort of sacred geometry built in, and it's whether the mind can decipher those informations. And you obviously sound on the right plane.
Right. Well, you'll find the numbers, the sacred numbers in what I call the lost scale, the lost music scale, which I've rediscovered, which we're now calling the scale of life. Those numbers exist cross-culturally and religiously. For example, the Great Pyramid of Egypt, when I took the idea that it was a giant crystal oscillator, which is where you get the electrons excited in the semiconductive material of the granite and the limestone, and you can excite electrons in material with fire or heat or with an electrical charge. And I believe they use an electrical charge, and later they use fire. But once the electrons are excited enough, you'll generate a standing electromagnetic wave, which means it's oscillating at the speed of light. And because the pyramid, when it was finished, its finished dimensions, its original slope angle finished was 51 degrees and 51 minutes in the old, 6-base, degrees, minutes, and seconds counting system, and 360 degrees in a circle, which is another 6-base. What you find is that number is so key. It's so key everywhere, and I have a little video on Vimeo called The Vortex that really gives you a visual of what that's all about. But what it's about is that I take, to calculate the speed, the frequency of a standing oscillating wave, meaning the wave is oscillating in a standing position, not propagating through space, but standing and resonating in that spot, which is what planets and stars do. So you take the square wavelength of the perimeter of the capstone base of the Great Pyramid, and I resolve that in Egyptian inches, which are almost the same as our inch, but I do it perfectly. And then I resolve the speed of light in Egyptian inches perfectly. And I take the speed of light divided by the wavelength, which is how you calculate an electromagnetic frequency.
They were using, cubits, wasn't it?
Well, no. So you go from the Egyptian inch or primitive inch, or you can go to cubits. Now, this is going to get really mind-blowing, because I'm going to explain a cubit to you, too. So the frequency I get for the capstone of the pyramid base is 5.151 megahertz square wave. And holy cow, that's the number of the slope angle of the pyramid. And as we were talking earlier, the god Apollo creates the Lyre, and there's the Lyre and the Lyran, star system is probably resonant with where the god Apollo and his brother Hermes come from, and they create this Lyre. And the name of the first Lyre was called the Kithara in Greece. And Kithara becomes Sitara in India, and becomes guitar in the Western civilization. So that's where that name guitar comes from. It comes from Kithar. So Kithar in Greek, see, the ancient Greek world, every word and every letter in the Greek alphabet had a number, a numerology, not a kind of modern numerology, an actual mathematical number. And the number for Kithara is 5-1. And so that means the Greeks knew about the 5151 as well. Now,
we also have 5.1 stereo,
wait,
don't we?
Does that have anything to do with why Area 51 was?
See, that's it. Now it's getting more and more interesting. So
yeah.
So now you go to Google Earth and zoom in on Stonehenge. It's sitting at 51 degrees north.
Have you seen the new crop circle that's appeared there last week?
Yeah. Yeah, now the Stonehenge is sitting at 51 degrees and 1 minute north latitude. Rosslyn Chapel is at 551 degrees, 5551 degrees north latitude. They're all encoded with the number of
51.
Where C, 515.1 is where C should be at on your bass octave in your music scale. So that means the Greeks knew this, and the Egyptians knew it because that's the slope angle of the pyramid. And that is where Stonehenge is sitting, and most of the crop circles in England are sitting between the 51 and 52 degree line. And 51 degrees and 51 minutes is just a tad under 52.
So do you feel that the 7 tones of sound, inside each tone is a sort of different framework, in a sense?
There's not 7 tones. See, the scale I found in the pyramid, there's 7 tones from the base of the pyramid up, but the subterranean pyramid represents another 3. So you have 3 tones inside the earth, and then you won't believe what the first number is. The first tone underneath the pyramid of the scale, using the math and the slope angle and the wavelength, is 1111. And that is what astounded me. When I saw that number, I went, oh my God. The 1111 that everybody's seeing on the clocks, they're trying to tell you that the scale that I've discovered in the lost scale is what you want to tone to. You don't want to distort your chakras with the wrong tones.
Yeah.
Remember, you won't turn on, imagine your chakras are like bells. You're 7, so you have glands connected to the sex. Yeah, real physical glands, your sexual glands at the base of the spine. You have your adrenal glands, just below the sternum. You have your navel, which is where you were plugged into your mother's womb. And then you have your heart chakra, which is regulated by the thymus gland. And then you have the pituitary and pineal gland in the center of the brain. And so you have these 7 major chakra points, but you actually have higher light points above the 7th chakra. You actually have an 8th, 9th, and 10th. So in the book of Psalms in the Bible, there's descriptions of a 10-stringed lyre or kithara. Same thing. The lyre and the kithara are pretty much the early versions of the harp, which eventually also gets distorted. So what I'm saying is this number is everywhere. Now, here's where it gets mind-blowing. The Ark of the Covenant, there's this theory that Moses, of course, we know he was raised by Egyptians. We know the story that he was found in a basket in the river, and he was raised in Egyptian. Even though he was a Hebrew, he was raised in Egyptian. And that Moses would have known exactly what I'm telling you now. And the reason I know that's true is because when his God tells him to build the Ark of the Covenant, he tells him to build it 2.5 cubits. Now this is where it gets really amazing, because Peter Le Mesurier, who wrote The Great Pyramid Decoded in the 70s, he shows you the most common measurement everywhere inside the Great Pyramid. I can't tell you how many places this measurement is, but 2 royal cubits is equal to 41.21 Egyptian inches. Or at that length, it's the same as the common modern inch, because that's how close they are. It's 0.0016 difference. I mean, the difference is so small, it's negligible. So if we take a true royal cubit would be half of 41.21 inches, it's 20.605 inches per cubit, right? And now today you get 20.625, and you get all these other cubits, which you'll read about online. And a cubit is not absolutely defined. It is very hard to define a cubit. But if 20.605 is a true cubit, and God says make the ark 2.5 cubits, watch what happens. 20.605 times 2.5 cubits long is 51.51 inches.
No way.
So there's the number again. So what does that tell you? Oh my God, it's the 5151. Which is when you listen to the Lost Scale in my meditation course, which is what everyone's toning to, and getting these amazing spiritual openings, that's where C is sitting at 515.1. And
funny, if you think of the ISIS figures, and I mean these sort of fundamentalists, it's the opposite, isn't it? It's 1515.
Well, turn 5151 upside down, it spells ISIS.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right. As I was just saying. Question for you: the double tetrahedron that everyone talks about, that is encoded everywhere from the Tree of Life in the Kabbalah, does the number, the 5151, have anything to do with that?
I haven't. It does because 5151 is only one of the numbers. So there's a whole scale of 10 bass tones, and then there's an octave shift. See, in our music scale, you say A is at 440, right? And I really believe they made the mistake of putting A at 440 because in the old cubit, the cubit that they're using, the Great Pyramid's side length is about 440 cubits. So it's interesting that we put A on our music scale at 440 hertz. But if you take my cubit that I found, which is 20.605 inches, and do the math, and you get the real cubit, and you divide it into the length of the Great Pyramid, it's closer to 444, and which is really amazing. But my
is there anything else happening in, say, hertz of these nut figures?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, you convert them to hertz. So when you listen to the video, The Lost Scale, you'll hear the pyramid scale does not distort. It's absolutely beautiful. The A440 is clearly wrong, and I'm saying it might have come from the base length of the Great Pyramid because they got it wrong. They didn't have a true cubit, and nobody really knows what Pythagoras wrote. See, we try to attribute the modern music scale to Pythagoras, but we don't really know his math because after generations and generations and finding the different Pythagorean manuscripts, many of which were illegal and burned, I believe because the Greeks called the kithara, which is a musical
instrument. Yeah.
It's the beginning of all musical instruments, is 5-1. It means their C was at 515.1, and that's where my C is at. But I have all my other notes. I have a total of 360 tones inside of the audible scale.
Exactly a circle. Exactly.
A circle. And our music scale, our octave is ×2. Which to me is really primitive because ×2 does not exist anywhere in nature. I don't know where our modern, music scale ended up with a ×2 octave shift. So the next octave up, A would be at 880, right? 880 hertz. And then you go A, B, C, D, F, G, and then you have your flats and your sharps. So you have 12 tones in the chromatic music scale. And in the pyramid scale, you have 10 tones, but you have 12 octaves. In the modern scale, you have 12 tones, and you have barely 8 octaves of truly audible tones. So the question is this part of what happened with locking down the human brain in the pineal gland so that it couldn't get luminous by giving us the wrong tones? Was that intentional? Was it because we were asleep and we didn't know what Pythagoras' math really showed?
I've heard a lot about calcifying, the pineal gland. Have you heard about that at all?
Well, yeah,
sure.
We were talking about that on purpose in the beginning. Let me throw something in the mix real quick, David. Dr. Roger Lear, before he passed away, told me a really interesting story, that the Tower of Babel was not, obviously, just as everything that we have in the Bible, is not the way it really went down, essentially, that we had the ability to use our brain to the fullest extent, and we're communicating telepathically. But something had happened at that point during that building of the tower, where all of a sudden we had to use our mouths to speak for the first time in humanity, and that's when we lost sort of our ability to use our pineal gland, and therefore the speaking of tongues wasn't that to different people or God. It
was the language of telepathy.
It was just the first time that you lost that ability to read someone's thoughts and feel their emotions and had to communicate with your mouth. What do you think of that?
Well, it's quite amazing because it's true. Like, for example, when you read the book of Enoch and it describes the qualities of the fallen ones and the fallen angels, the fact that we had to confirm our faith with a pen and the spoken word would mean people could lie, they could give false testimony.
Yep.
You could be reading a history book that's completely whacked out because the person who wrote it was not perfectly clear-headed, and they can depict a person as, something they're not, and you would believe it because it was written. And
it's also interesting how stationery is what it is, a piece of paper, but once given a signature, it's given life. And
we call it history, but it's his story, right? It's
good point.
And that's what's interesting about what the story of Enoch is when you lose this consciousness, you lose the Akashic record access. You don't know what really happened in the Kennedy assassination. You have these theories, but the actual Akashic, consciousness record knows exactly what happened everywhere, and it's not written down. It's literally recorded inside of the atomic structures, and so there's a way to extract that. The yogis in India have told me that when you go into the samadhi state or the superluminous state, you can look at anything and know the history of what has actually occurred there. And that's essentially what a good psychic is doing when they read a scene and they feel the vibrations after a crime scene. They get pictures in their head. They know what's happened because it's actually recorded there. So, so what happens is, imagine your 7 chakras or 10 are like bells, and you're giving them the wrong tone so that the energy can't rise up and ascend. Because there's distortion between the notes, the waves are crashing into each other and causing it to wobble, which means distort, and therefore you cannot awaken. When I was a little kid, I would go to sleep, my mom would turn the light out, and my head would get so bright, blindingly bright, I would swear the lights were on. I'd open my eyes and there's no light on, and then I'd go back to sleep and it would look like car headlights coming into my head. By the time I was 12, this was still happening. Not every night, but it would happen a lot. When I started, of course, you brush your teeth with fluoride, which contains aluminum. Fluoride is a byproduct of aluminum, and they say that the aluminum calcifies the pineal, the gland, and the photo or light-sensitive chemicals it contains. But it's not just luminous light that the pineal contains, it's ecstasy light that it contains. And the reason I know that is, in my 35 years of meditating,
tryptamine, yeah,
I've been doing the tones to the scale, and you sing to the tone at the same time you hear it. So you're trying to resonate your voice with the tones of the law scale as you're doing it. And you hear this shimmering inside of you. And now, for the last 2 months, I swear this is true with my hand held to the highest form of God, that there's so much ecstasy when I meditate at night, and it only takes remarkably 20 minutes. After 20 minutes, the ecstasy starts pouring in. And I said, it's coming from my pineal. I told my wife, it's coming from the pineal gland. It's shimmering because we've been doing these tones for, 6 months, the people in the course. And if you do it, religiously, properly, repeatingly.
Yeah, I was going to say, your course is set up for 6 months.
It's set up for 6 months, but then you want to keep toning. And then year 2, we go into the next... there's 3 scales of 120 tones each, so that gives you 360 tones. But the point is, my pineal is producing this tons of ecstasy, and it's really good. It's phenomenal quality, velvety super consciousness, and the ecstasy coming from my pineal seems to be dissolving my body boundaries so that I'm feeling the entire cosmos. Like I walk down the stairs at night, and the stars are out, and I'm just, oh my God, I'm literally the whole universe. I feel the whole cosmos. And there's bliss and ecstasy everywhere. And it doesn't matter whether I look at a tomato on the counter in the middle of the night or a potato or a dish. It's all God. It's all bliss. It's all cosmic ecstasy. And why was it that all the years, like, in India, again, we have these 3 systems. And I don't just want to rely on India, because these 3 systems exist in the Tibetan Buddhist system, they exist in ancient Judaic systems, and even we now know in ancient Christianity, Jesus taught his disciples to tone, which is in the Gospel of the Egyptians. And so you have the breath work, and you have the physical exercise of the body, which, asana, yoga, or you have different forms of body working and breathing that you do in Tibetan and Buddhist systems. And then you hold the body still in a meditation posture to focus, and you work with sound, you work with tones to cause your chakras to ring like bells. When you hit the note perfectly with your voice, then you will get, the bell will start shimmering. You'll hear it inside of you. And then the shimmering and the shimmering and the shimmering eventually causes all of your chakras in your pineal gland to light up, activate your light body, and you start going into these super blissful, expanded states of consciousness. And the Buddha describes this he doesn't say he's God. Buddha says his system is to eradicate the perception of suffering and put you in nirvanic bliss. So it's all about, in Buddhism, ascending your consciousness so you're no longer perceiving negativity and suffering.
Yeah.
And that's what's missing in a lot of Western interpretations of Christianity, is Jesus is all about the joy, the rapture. The rapture actually means joy. I've had many Buddhist monks that I practice with. So, for them, rapture is samadhi, it's bliss, it's joy, it's light.
Joy is to become light-hearted, isn't it? It's
right.
The intent is that the physical world becomes such a weight to us, to our heart, to our energy, that what we truly aspire to is to become light beings and lose all of that weight. And that's going back to your path, where you said the light path is almost sort of a duality, single sort of clear path. It resonates, to me.
Well, yeah, because you're wasting all of your energy on this conflict. So we got sucked into good and evil, thinking that God wanted us to get good and evil. But actually, good and evil, the whole thing is a conflict. So you're ingesting a conflict, you become a conflict, and you never agree with anybody about what's right and what's wrong. And so everybody's fighting all the time. And they got it all wrong. They misinterpreted the fall from grace, thinking God wanted you to know good and evil. Remember, God said, don't ever take in the knowledge of good and evil, and we inadvertently side with the serpent, the reptilian, who tells Adam and Eve to take in this knowledge of good and evil. And we now believe, we know good and evil now, our eyes are open. Well, wait a minute, you're not listening to what God said. He said, never take that knowledge of good and evil in, because you're going to become a conflict, and you're going to fight everybody.
And that's exactly what we're doing. Going back to your childhood, when you first experienced this light, were you the only one in your family to have this ability, or did any of your siblings, your brothers, have this?
I certainly think my brothers were having experiences. I mean, my brother Michael Sereda, is an avid meditator to this day, and he describes this same incredible, we call each other, and our main conversation is, how was your meditation this week, and we're exchanging stories of super cosmic ecstasy or velvety. There's many different shifts of the consciousness and what you perceive in it. It's not always the same. And, one morning I woke up here recently and I told my wife, oh my God, I'm both inside everything and on the outside. I'm actually sitting inside of the glass, inside of the tree, inside of the rock, inside of the covered material, and I'm on the outside seeing it physically. And it's the most velvety, absolutely still consciousness. The art in meditation is when you start having these awakening experiences is trying to describe it with words, which is pretty hard to do.
Oh, exactly. Thank you. I was just going to say, we use words, right? Two dimensional words. How can we try to capture something that's three-dimensional, like a feeling, and try to place it into a two-dimensional word? We can't.
We can't, but we have, sacred geometry and art, and we have music. And, for me, just like a singer will train their voice with, the old music scale, and they'll eventually become a really good singer. Like, I was even reading about, it was the death of one of the guys from Yes, it came this week, the band Yes, and how he was a choir boy in school, and then he dropped out of that. And I thought, wow, the church did an amazing thing, because Whitney Houston, so many singers got their training in church.
From choir.
And choir, right. And then they realized, I want to do something different. I don't just want to sing choir all my life. And they end up taking their creativity and their singing to a whole other level. And I think that's what is with this scale that I've discovered, I've got so many musicians and music artists who want to see, a new piano with the scale in it. They want to see new instruments with it in it, and they really want it to evolve. But the music world, on a larger sense, hasn't clued in yet, even though I've been talking about this for over a year now.
Well, what did you think of Whitney?
I'm wondering if they haven't clued in because they're being suppressed.
Well, they're brainwashed. See, when you go to school and you go to music school, you're going to learn all this stuff, and you're going to learn how to write music, and then you go, oh my God, it's all off. I've even had one girl taking my course and said, I always felt it, when I was doing voice practice and singing practice, that it was off. It just didn't seem right to me. And she said, your scale, which is really the old Egyptian and Greek scale rediscovered, is perfect. She goes, it makes so much sense when you sing to these perfect tones.
When you just said rediscovered, there's a question for you right there. Do you think that we lost the knowledge somewhere along the way, or was it purposely prevented by the powers that be from keeping that knowledge within all of humanity versus now just those handful?
I think it was intentional. Absolutely. I think they knew that the early, fathers and probably not very many mothers of the founding music theories, that they knew that the real scale would be sequestered for the elite, and that they would give us this false scale. But I also believe that the Beatles and Pink Floyd and many of them, if you actually take a spectral meter, you would find that they are naturally probably playing a lot of music to the real scale, and they probably hit it and then they jump out of it, and they hit it and they jump out of it. But their pianos and guitars, sometimes they would retune it themselves, like they didn't stick to the absolute, tuning method. They would shift it, because they would want to create a different sound, right? So if you wanted to create a different sound, and you're, a Ringo Starr or Paul McCartney or a George Harrison, you would say, okay, I don't like the sound of my guitar with A, B, C, D, F, G. I'm going to shift it a little. And so you don't know what they did when they were doing those shifts. Was it intuitive? And is that why everybody felt their heart so much? One thing I'd like to do is study, you can buy this app that reads the frequency of every sound in the room, and it's only $5 on the App Store, and you can actually, and I've tested it, I've tone tested the app, and it's accurate. I've tested it with a tone generator, and so I'd like to see where they were really at. Were they really on key with traditional scale, or did they move it closer into the range of what the numbers are that I'm seeing in the lost pyramid scale?
When you talk about the Akashic record, obviously that's our universal knowledge, our universal consciousness, which obviously includes all other beings living in other dimensions, other planets, and other galaxies even. Have you ever had the ability to see any of their homes?
Well, their homes, that's a really good question. I not with my physical eyes open, like the boot.
But with your eyes closed, I'm saying.
No,
while you're
yeah.
meditating.
Oh, yeah. No, I've seen their geometries of their buildings and the materials so much more advanced than what we have. Everything, like I was literally shown, this happened the first year we moved to Nelson, British Columbia, and I was pulsing very interesting frequencies through my mantra transmitters, which is what I use to open up portals. The mantra transmitters are Great Pyramid Angle, 551 degrees, 51-minute vortex generators, which are, at davidsereda.net. People actually buy these things and meditate with them. And so,
yeah, let's go ahead and talk while you're on it. While you just plugged in that site again. Again, for anybody who's going to hearing this, davidsereda.net. That's where your course is, your meditation course.
Yeah, the meditation course is there. It's all on flash drive now for year one. And my mantra transmitters and wands are there, which you can use to transmit these frequencies into your room and as you're going to sleep. And it really, really opens up the portal to the higher dreaming worlds. So what I found in this one dream, this was amazing. I saw the city of Nelson in, I don't know if it was the future or a parallel universe, but all of the wooden homes had been abandoned, and people were living in these buildings that were made of a clear material like glass, but it was as hard as steel, and it conducted electricity, and their ability to heat and cool their buildings was so efficient with this material that they no longer used the wood. They would put the wood in the flooring and cabinets, and the buildings were very beautiful geometries, plants growing inside, and it was an incredible experience. So, and I'm literally shown where my house is now in that dream, that there's nobody living in it anymore, and people visit the old houses, but they're living in these buildings. And so it wasn't long after the experience that I discovered graphene was this new super material that can be transparent like glass, 400 or 500 times harder than steel, and it conducts electricity better than a solar panel, so you can make buildings out of it, and that we're on the verge. I mean, we've discovered graphene. We're trying to find ways to manufacture more of it. But if graphene was fully funded, especially, by the government, because the government can always come up with way more money than an investor can come up with, we could change the world overnight with graphene. So my experience matched a reality. But what I realized with civilization is that whatever we focus on, whatever the public puts their money in, that's what grows. So if everybody wants laptops and iPods, then that's what you're going to get more of. But if you want graphene, you got to start putting your money into graphene. Not only the research is phenomenal in graphene. I mean, if you go to phys.org, phys.org, you'll read articles on graphene. I mean, it's phenomenal. It can do everything that I was shown in this dream. The question is, was the dream in the future? Was it
or another dimension?
Another dimension of Earth? A paradise type of Earth? Because I was shown there are two houses where I live now, one in that universe and one in this universe. And maybe in that parallel universe, they chose to focus on graphene. So if we all focus on graphene, and it becomes the next big craze in the whole semiconductive, silicon world of semiconductors, just like silica, which is quartz crystal, became the focus of all the crystal oscillators and transistors in our computers and computer devices, graphene will probably triumph over it eventually, no matter what, because it's just a fact. The scientists in the solid state world are discovering graphene. But what was amazing is that my experience wasn't, it was totally real. I could identify a real, material that can do this. And so all we have to do now is focus on graphene, get everyone thinking about graphene, and everyone asking their senators and congressmen to put, billions into graphene, and you can make buildings out of it. And a meteor could hit the side of it and wouldn't dent it. A tree could fall on it and wouldn't, do any damage to it.
Do you think that's something that's going to be stolen again, like the 5,000 patents that that would have helped us?
Well, no, because graphene is so well known now in the semiconductor world and its properties. It's just a matter of when they're going to figure out how to mass produce graphene, and there are some indications that you need silver to manufacture a lot of graphene, and that could send silver prices soaring. I believe it's silver. Let me see. Silver.
Because I was going to say, gold is one of the highest conducting metals because it's 100% conductivity, right?
Yeah, but it won't compare. Like, that's a conductor. A graphene is literally a photoconductive. It can, you can make solar panels out of it. You can make it clear as here you go, phys.org.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm reading an article right here.
Growth on silver. Here it is. So graphene grows on silver. So if they are able to mass produce it and they need the silver, then silver prices would explode if we spent the money. And I believe it's the government's job to do this. They need to spend billions on graphene because it will mean you can make energy efficient buildings that can heat and cool themselves with the energy they produce in the structure. And it's so much better than photovoltaic and even thin film solar. It's far better than thin film. You got to read about graphene. So
Yeah, I have just right here. One of the news that just came 20 hours ago. Major physics prize for graphene researcher.
What's your take on colloidal silver? Because obviously, if that does happen and then the price of silver goes up, people that feel healed by the elements of colloidal silver, do you know about that?
Yeah, I actually make colloidal silver and gold using the pyramid frequencies. So I don't just put 12 volts through a silver probe. I have this super sacred geometry coil that goes into my silver coil that makes the silver, colloidal silver and gold, at the pyramid frequencies. And that's, you go to davidsereda.net, you go to the store, and you go to health products at the bottom, and I sell it there. And I've got people taking it, and I have this one woman who buys like 6 bottles every couple of weeks because she said it's totally changing her just drinking it. It's like an elixir. It's totally restructuring all of the energy in her body, just drinking this stuff. So instead of making colloidal silver just 12 volts, which is meaningless, you put the harmonics through the charge, and then that goes into making the silver, and you're drinking harmonic silver, harmonic gold. And that's what you need to get in your body. It's not just the element, the conductive silver that you need in the copper and the gold. It's actually the harmonics.
Have you heard about sort of metabolic gold as well, that some people take in a powder form? I'd heard
I talked about
it was very dangerous because it would disconnect you, almost again like the calcifying of the pineal gland. You would be sort of shut off.
David Hudson developed the white gold, the powder, which he believed with the manna from heaven was the same thing. It depends how you make it. It depends who's making it and how they're making it. And again, I really believe what's missing in the monatomic gold world is making it with these frequencies. And I'm the first one to describe this. I told Len Horowitz about it, and he started making his colloidal silver with the 528 love frequency, right? So he took my idea and started doing that. And that's great. Everyone's going to start doing it. And I've already got companies interested in getting my gold and silver from me, because the way I do it is so different than the way, other people would put frequencies in their probe. It's so different. It's much more sophisticated. But that's how the world changes. You put an idea out there, and then everybody tries to do it in their own way. And so graphene, see, what I like about these, this is what we were talking about earlier, Dr. J, is you have a physical UFO, and then you have the consciousness experience around it. And when you're dealing with a military craft, there's going to be no consciousness experience around the sighting other than perceiving it. But when you have a real ET, craft visiting you, they usually appear to you in the dream state, or they can holographically appear in front of you if they're very advanced, as most of them are. And then you can start to get information about how we're going to change everything here. So my experience about the graphene is, how can I get everybody to think about graphene and really make it the next big revolution and start making buildings out of it with these 3D printers? Imagine a 3D printer printing a graphene house, the main structure. It's indestructible. It's like 400 or 500 times stronger than steel. You can't destroy a graphene house. A tree can fall on it. Somebody can smash into it with their car. They can fire bullets at it. And the thing will produce electricity and cool and heat itself. So there goes all those gas and oil, polluting our rivers and streams. So graphene is a big, big deal. It's a massive deal. And I knew nothing about it until I had this experience. And so did they want me to know, because they knew I go on all these radio shows, that we're going to show him a parallel Earth where this could be your future if you make this choice to go after graphene. Now, I'm not invested in graphene. I'm not talking about this from an investment point of view because I don't have the money to invest in graphene. But I believe it could change the entire world.
We need someone like Foster Gamble, who's fortunately is a really nice guy, very philanthropic. We need someone like him to step in and pour some resources there.
Yeah, and my idea is to make sacred geometry. What I saw in Nelson in the future, or this parallel Earth, where the buildings, in fact, what's amazing is when I was in Los Angeles passing through and I used my technology, I saw a future LA, all graphene buildings, see-through glass made of, stronger than steel. And I saw it almost everywhere I traveled that year. And because we had just moved from Sedona and to Nelson, and I was seeing the graphene super buildings with sacred geometry structures everywhere I went. And I realized, oh my God, this is it. Most of our energy is wasted in heating and cooling our buildings. So now it's summer in the Northern Hemisphere, and it's 104 degrees here in Canada, believe it or not. And it's a heat wave, and there's forest fire threats, and people are consuming energy to cool down. And then in the winter, we're fracking and destroying all our well water to get the natural gas to heat our homes. So graphene would eliminate the need for that.
I think that is absolutely, and the more I'm seeing it as you were speaking about it, so obviously I'm looking it up. It is, you're right, it is definitely out there. I see page after page. Yale, there's a link from, Yale, SUN, I don't know what or NUS College, and then it's got something to do with nanotechnology. This can be absolutely very big.
Yeah, and it's silver. If silver is the metal.
Sorry, go ahead, Dave. I was going to say, but you mentioned the fracking side, and what is going on with fracking, because they've started to introduce that into the UK, and there are sort of demonstrators that are sort of anti that. They feel that with what it's doing, it's pumping sort of radiation and chemicals into the actual rock face and cracking it open and letting these gases out. But it's also going into a water stream, and people are lighting, not in England I haven't seen, but in America where you can light the tap water. Is that a concern for you?
Well, absolutely. This is what I mean. They're making it illegal to build fireplaces in many homes, and I've heated our home with electric and all the waste wood, like naturally fallen trees and trees that get wind blown down, and so there's a lot of good ways to heat your homes using waste materials, and they're making it more and more illegal to put in fireplaces because the gas companies are lobbying these laws so that you'll have to buy their natural gas, but to get more natural gas they have to frack and do explosions underground and destroy our precious water supplies. So this is where we're going. It's all about our choices that we're making. And you could get just as many jobs in the graphene industry as you could in the natural gas industry. It's just wherever you decide to put money and to cause something to grow. It does require a re-education and job training for a lot of people, but some people get mad and they say, well, you're just going to destroy our jobs, the gas, oil, mining industry. And it's not about that. There'll be tons of jobs in graphene. Are you kidding me? Rebuilding everything with graphene and using stone and wood for beauty and countertops and wood floors instead of for the the actual standing structure is an incredible idea, because you'll have solar energy through the graphene. You'll have better than solar panels, and then you can start going to the next level and the next level and get to anti-gravity and get to opening portals. My work right now, the main focus is the tones, the meditation course, and getting people to understand that you need a harmonic resonator because your body's an electric body. You can measure voltage on your fingers. We live in an electric world. It's not going to change. We have the internet. All the frequencies of the internet are bombarding your DNA. You need a sacred geometry vortex generator like I sell on my website to reharmonize your house. End of story. It's an appliance of the future. If you don't have one, your brain is going to scramble more and more and more.
How much do they cost, these devices?
Well, I have them. The lower priced ones are $850 right now, and they go all the way up to several thousand, depending on how big of a one you want. And you need a little $250 tube amp to run it. And I train everybody on how to, you get all these different programs, pyramid frequencies, frequencies of the 9 planets, infinity frequencies, Fibonacci frequencies. They all come on this flash drive. You put it in your iPad or your computer device, and that connects to the amplifier, which connects to the transmitter. And so I really don't believe that the creativity of the future is going to survive when everyone's brains are being bombarded by microwaves from the internet and cell phone towers. So you got to understand that you're part of the electric equation. Tesla argued this Electricity and the human body are not separate things. You have electricity in your body. So don't think that it's unnatural to transmit natural harmonic frequencies into your body, because that's what the sun does. That's what the earth does. That's what the planets are doing. That's what the cosmos is doing. It's transmitting sacred geometry frequencies. But our electricity that we're surrounded with every day, unless you live in a cave, is scrambling your brain. It's scrambling your brain. It's turning you into a product of the matrix. And if you want to get out, there's no other way to get out than...
A lot of people have complained about these wind farms, that these actual big sort of windmills that are causing them sleepless nights and things like that. And then other people are complaining on the same sort of energy wave as like these smart meters. I don't know if it's gas companies or whatever.
Yeah,
in
the
America.
smart meters are so powerful. I've measured them. They're way more powerful than the internet. The microwaves coming out of a smart meter are off the chart.
Yeah, and in England they changed their light bulbs to these curly bulbs, and it's like, you know, people are complaining that this energy, this light, is just like sort of zapping them. And
yeah, the little compact fluorescents emit radio waves and microwaves. I've tested them with meters, so they're part of brainwashing everybody. You got to change your light bulbs to LED, because the LED doesn't have a transmitter in it. A filament bulb or a compact fluorescent will transmit frequency. So they can use the grid to entrap you in a frequency grid. And now that's where you get into the dark side of using frequencies to trap the soul, to actually trap it. Robert Monroe, you know, who was an out-of-body master from Monroe Institute, there's a book called, by Claude Swanson. He's an MIT physicist who used physics to explain consciousness. And in his book, The Synchronized Universe, he describes this experiment by Monroe, where Monroe sleeps with a cage of wires around him, and they don't put any electricity in the cage, and he's able to go out of body, and he sees himself going through the wire cage, and he goes out of body. He describes it. But then when they put certain frequencies in the cage, even Monroe could not get out of his body. He couldn't leave the cage. And that's what we are. More and more people I've talked to, meditators, over the years, are finding that it's harder and harder to get out of your body at night and go into the superluminal realms. And that is because your house is surrounded with wires that are being pulsed at frequencies that they know will trap you in the matrix.
And same thing with our iPhone.
Right, like a spiritual Faraday cage.
It's like a spiritual Faraday cage. They have got you in a prison through the wiring and your devices. So the only way out is to have one of my devices that can pulse with pyramid frequencies or natural, Fibonacci frequencies, or this ancient scale, and your whole room, your whole house starts to become a holographic pyramid, and you can project out quite nicely. I've done hundreds of experiments with this technology with my other users and myself, and I found it doesn't matter how much bliss I'm in that night when I go to bed. If I don't use my mantra transmitter, my dreams are trapped inside of the matrix astral plane. When I use the device, more times than not, I will get out of the matrix. And once you dream out of the matrix, that's where the creative insights come that's going to change the world for the better. See, every invention on the planet, including your cell phone, started in somebody's mind. So the mind is everything. Some people say, that's just dreaming. It's not important. What do you mean? Dreams are the stuff that everything's made of. Your table was somebody's dream. Your floor, the art on the wall was somebody's dream. So the dream is everything. You're going to spend 8 hours of a night sleeping. You may as well be, exploring creativity rather than just being completely unconscious.
Isn't in the dream area of consciousness, and not dreaming as in going to sleep and rapid eye movement. I mean, in that daydream consciousness that the teacher used to slap the table with a ruler, wake up.
Right.
In that particular area is where the neurons are formed to create new ways, and it's through that co-creation is created, so that events can happen to the future, to come into your life, to come into the experience.
Right, and that's why, where did a scientist get the idea to discover graphene would have all these properties. A lot of these scientists, they change our lives, but their discoveries go unnoticed if the public doesn't notice. So if we don't notice and say, hey, we want graphene buildings in the future, and architects don't go, hey, I'm going to start designing buildings out of graphene because this is what the building could do. And, the first ones will be very expensive until we figure out how to use the silver and make tons of graphene. Then it's going to be cheaper and cheaper, and then there'll be 3D printing graphene. You want to print the structure of the house out of the graphene, and then you have your water and your beauty, your countertops and your floors and your closets. It's nice to use the wood and the stone and the granite and all these things. But the next thing we're going to realize is that, yantra, which is the geometry that sound vibrations set up, the structure and the geometry of your house is a huge part of the equation of how you're going to conquer depression, how you're going to feel better, and how, like the Buddha said, meditation conquers the perception of suffering. Because
it's like a feng shui for the soul, like you say,
right.
These things around you holding you back, and you're not getting that pure flow mode,
Yeah, we live in unharmonic rectangles that are not even golden rectangles. We live in squares, and we have no openings on the corners, like of our buildings. When you have a rectangle or a square, you need to have openings on each corner to let air flow in and out. So you need to have windows in the corners that you can open, all four corners of a square or a rectangle. And it doesn't only allow air to flow, it allows ions to flow, ionic energy. So I think we really got, like the Native Americans believe, the teepee, which is a pyramid, it's a cone. They would have a lot of mystical experiences, and they would leave an opening in the top of the cone because the energy would spin and condense in there, and vortex. They would have vortex energy. And so that's what I realized.
Vortex energy similar to the torus.
Right. Well, my mantra tables are a vortex pyramid angle torus. They're very sophisticated geometry. The field they set up is great pyramid angle triangles spinning clockwise in a torus. There's a hole in the middle, and it's three-dimensional, and it turns into a spinning vortex torus. So if you want to spin, like if you put a ball magnet on a dish in the middle of one of my mantra transmitters, it will spin around in circles in the dish, and then all of a sudden it'll go clockwise, and then it'll go counterclockwise, and then clockwise, and all by itself because of the numbers that I programmed in the tracks. And that's
Are you able to share any of that?
Yeah, if you go to here, I'll send you guys a link right now to that video, the Vortex, my video called the Vortex, and Vortex on Vimeo. Here it is.
You definitely have to do more, and we'll set that thing up with Jim because obviously he hasn't called back yet.
Yeah, we have to do a follow-up with Jim.
Yeah, and then I'll get obviously Bob, to get on good audio. Warn me before you go so I could stop this so we could talk privately before you go.
So here's the link to the Vortex on you got to watch that video because you want to create vortex energy in your house because the energy in your house is stagnant. It's not spinning, it's not moving, it's dead, and that's why people get depressed in their houses, and that's why depression is an epidemic in our culture, is because we don't meditate, we live in structures that don't resonate, and we don't open the corners of our rectangles and our squares, so the energy won't flow through it. And so my answer is to have one of these vortex mantra transmitters to spin the energy in your house in a harmonic way and get it all moving. And
I'm glad you mentioned that depression is an epidemic because really I think people are more depressed now than any time in the history of humanity.
Oh, way more.
Yeah.
Oh, they're so depressed now. They're working way too hard. It's too much of a burden on, even relationships. A lot of relationships fail.
Yep.
And because of money stresses, we're both working so hard to pay rent or a mortgage and the food and everything. I mean, we're slaves. We're just going like crazy to meet this enormous number that we just invented, that the bank invented.
That's right. I was just going to say that the bank invented.
The bank invented,
it is an illusion as well. We need to break this illusion, and everyone knows it. It doesn't matter which country you come from. People realize these people have created these illusions that through just a few bits of media and a few familiar faces, everyone seems to have to agree to and accepts it as the natural truth. But it's just absolute hogwash. And people are awake, and we do know that some of these things are only illusions. So in the same medium, we need to just deny them and, damn right refuse to pay these things sometimes.
Right. Yeah, I think what's happening in Greece and Spain and is going to happen here is everyone should just live in their houses and stop paying, because these bankers, they double. I mean, if the price of the house isn't high enough, they're going to double it over the term of your mortgage, and they just sit.
Oh, easy.
The bank just sits back, and millions of homes are going to pay the bank this huge interest, and for doing nothing.
And then they lose their houses. That's the part that bothers me the most. You pay for decades just to get foreclosed.
Wow, I just heard this big wave come through my microphone. It was like a huge energy wave. Anyway, you guys, I gotta go. It's been 2 hours, and
I know, David. I'm so sorry. We never get bored of speaking.
Well, we can keep. We'll continue. Because I want to do a whole show.
Part one.
I want to do a whole show on the techniques of meditation and the different types of techniques, and actually demonstrate some of them.
Yeah, I'd like to share that with you.
And how people can go into these elevated states of consciousness, and what the techniques do, and why you have these different modalities that you shift throughout the month. So that would be our next one.
Absolutely.